hearings, and we'll take your phone calls. The Watergate 25th Anniversary Series airs each weeknight next week at 8 Eastern Time, 5 Pacific. Next, an Air Force report on a 1947 incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Yesterday, the Air Force issued a report at the Pentagon that they hope will close the book on rumors that they recovered a flying saucer and extraterrestrial bodies near Roswell 50 years ago and then covered it up. During this news conference, you'll hear from Colonel John Haynes of the Air Force Declassification Review Team. His comments are about 20 minutes.
Good afternoon. I only wish we'd been able to get this number of media here with us when we were trying to tell you about the importance of air power to national security recently. I'm Virginia Pribble, the Chief of Media Relations for the Air Force. This is a single subject briefing today on the release of an Air Force report titled The Roswell Report, Case Closed. Colonel John Haynes, Deputy Chief of the Air Force Declassification and Review Team, will have some opening remarks, show a brief video, and then answer your questions. Copies of the news release, report, and videos are either located or going to be located on the table near the entrance. We're running low on the report, so please take one per agency. The general public can obtain copies of the report from the government printing office. Related information and some photos will also be available on the internet on the Air Force link this afternoon. Colonel Haynes. You should have bios in your press packs, Haynes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure I'd like to show you this book, tell you it's $18 and head for the door, but there are 2 armed guards right there, and they're not going to let me out of that easily. Let me read my prepared statement, and then we'll roll a short video that Captain McAndrew will talk about, and then I will answer some questions. We're confident once the report is out and digested by the public that this will be the final word on the Roswell incident. The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, codenamed Mogul. Mogul was an attempt to acoustically detect Soviet nuclear blast and ballistic missile launches. Mogul used an odd assortment of equipment carried aloft by a balloon train more than 600 feet long. This balloon train consisted of 25 balloons, attached acoustic devices, and several radar reflectors, which looked like box kites. In 1947, it was the misidentification of these radar reflectors that is most likely the famous flying disc. Today, we're releasing the final report to address questions about alleged bodies associated with the Roswell story. This report has 4 main conclusions. If you have your books, turn to page 3. We'll have a lesson. 1, Air Force activities which occurred over a period of many years have been consolidated and are now represented to have occurred in 2 or 3 days in July 1947. 2, bodies observed in the New Mexico desert were probably test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research. 3, the unusual military activities in the New Mexico desert were high-altitude research balloon launch and recovery operations. The reports of military units that always seemed to arrive shortly after a crash were actually accurate descriptions of Air Force personnel engaged in the dummy recovery operations. 4, claims of bodies at the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital were most likely a combination of 2 separate incidents. 1 was a 1956 KC-97 aircraft accident in which 11 Air Force members lost their lives, or a 1959 manned balloon mishap in which 2 Air Force pilots were injured. That information is in this report. These conclusions are listed in page 3, as I said, of the book. Please roll the video.
First clip's pretty quick. I'm going to start off some Air Force high-altitude balloon operations, and the first project's going to be a NASA Viking space probe tested in New Mexico. This was launched from Roswell, New Mexico in 1972 and is recovered on the White Sands Missile Range, about 100 miles to the west. That is the Voyager Mars, another test the Air Force did also at the complex.
Where's the bodies?
This is a typical Air Force high-altitude balloon launch operation in the desert of New Mexico. This is during the mid-50s. That's just a comparison of the size. You can see how many airliners you could fit inside a high-altitude research balloon at altitude. These are just some payloads, unusual payloads, not typically associated with a balloon. Next will be the Reconnaissance Project Mogul. The project took place in New Mexico in 1947. This is some equipment associated with Project Mogul. There's the famous box kite that became the famous flying disc. The weather balloons that were on the balloon train. That's the tinfoil paper, rubber, and sticks that they recovered in the desert near New Mexico in 1947. Here's what you've all been waiting for, the anthropomorphic dummies and Joseph W. Kittinger Jr. That's a typical test dummy used by the Air Force during the 1950s. There's one of the project officers with that particular dummy is known as a Sierra Sam, manufactured by Sierra Engineering Corporation. One of the technical reports listed in the bibliography of the report. This is actually a manned subject, but that's what the dummies were used for, to test ejection.
So that's not a dummy.
That's a man. Here's how the dummies were employed. 2 dummies to Iraq. Some were in a gondola. They flew up to 98,000 feet. This launch is in New Mexico. That's an upshot, and there goes the dummy. He would free fall for a period of time, and a drogue chute would deploy, and the object was to recover a human from a high-altitude aircraft. They often landed at off-range locations throughout New Mexico, often observed by civilians. This is where the recovery crews would scurry in to recover them, either with aircraft or ground vehicles. This is retired Colonel Joseph W. Kittinger Jr. This is the culmination of the high-altitude projects that used the dummies. And that's the Excelsior 3 gondola in 1960. And that's Captain Kittinger. That is the world record parachute jump, still stands today. He free fell for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. And he did it 3 times.
Okay, yes ma'am.
Why did it take so long to come up with this conclusion? You've come up with many other conclusions.
Well, the first report was the GAO required report for Project Mogul. When Captain Gandrew was doing additional research after that report had been given to the Secretary, and we were waiting to publish the second report, he was looking for additional pictures. And he uncovered some film strips of the balloon test and the dummies. And that's when he began to do further research. He sent it up the chain, and they said, this is excellent information. It's outstanding scientific research by the Air Force, and we want the public to know about it because it's the public's information.
Colonel, how do you square the UFO enthusiasts saying that they're talking about 1947, well, you're talking about dummies used in the 50s, almost a decade later?
Well, I'm afraid that's a problem that we have with time compression. I don't know what they saw in 47, but I'm quite sure it probably was Project Mogul. But I think if you find that people talk about things over a period of time, they begin to lose exactly when the date was. And there were lots of dummies dropped. There were about 2,500 balloons launched during this 30-year period in New Mexico alone.
So why do you think people in Roswell and elsewhere still are not convinced, no matter what you say?
I'm sorry, but I just can't answer that question for them. But they must look at the evidence. If you will read this book, and I'm sure you're going to take it home tonight and read it, quite frankly, you're going to find some very interesting and quite fascinating pieces of information about Air Force research. Whether you accept that as the Roswell information, I quite frankly don't know. But we do, because it overlays so well with this period of time.
UFO groups also.
Excuse me, sir.
Does the Air Force regret not declassifying some of this information sooner rather than just the last few years?
Great question. Nothing in here was ever classified. In the first report, everything was classified in the 70s.
How much did the study cost?
That's a good question, and quite frankly, we've not captured the data. But let me tell you that we've had no more than 1 or 2 people on it, probably not even full-time over the last 2 years. I can get that for you, but I just don't know, because we just got the book on the 10th, and I don't know what the publishing costs are. Yes, ma'am.
Colonel, let me just clear up 2 things that you sort of brushed over quickly. Number 1 was the time frame that people are going to say, but this is 10 years. How could they possibly make a mistake on the 10 years? And number 2, you said it was never classified, and yet why didn't people at the time say, well, my goodness, we were having dummy tests, this explains the answer?
Well, the dummy test, actually, you need to get the book. Actually, you need to look in there. If you look in here, you'll find there are a couple of things in which the dummy tests get lots of media attention. I have it tabbed, and I should be able to find it, but quite frankly, I'm sitting here and my knees are shaking.
26, sir.
But
20, page 26.
yes, explain those 2 things.
Okay, there's your pictures for that. But let me tell you that I don't know why they can't associate that time period. I'm sorry, I just don't have any information for that. All I know is what the Air Force did, and that if you overlay much of their claims and you look at the Air Force scientific research, you can see it's obvious that what we're talking about at Roswell, and I don't mean Roswell in 47, because that was Project Mogul. That was unmanned. I want to make that very clear. And that's the first report. But over that period of time, dummies were dropped all around there. And I think it's logical to assume that the people there saw Air Force ambulances come out, they saw gurneys come out, they saw body bags come out because the dummies were put into body bags to protect them. They saw people in pith helmets, they saw people in shorts out there brushing the bushes looking for the remnants of the balloons. And when you put all that stuff together and spin it, you find that it fits perfectly with many of the occurrences in Roswell during that era.
They also said that these figures were of much smaller stature than full-size adult figures. How do you reconcile that?
I don't reconcile that. I just have no idea why they say that.
Can you help us with when the dummies were first used? What year?
53.
And how many, you say, numbers?
Well, the actual balloon launchings were about 2,500. The actual number of dummies dropped were, it's actually in the book and it's very specific, but the number just escapes me. It's more than 300 or 400. Yes, sir.
Why did they make it, the design resemble to flying saucer? It makes it very suspicious.
The flying saucer. Now, you were talking about in the video. That's also in here, I might add, and you saw it in the video. Some of the, and you're looking at payloads. What they were doing is they wanted to recover these payloads, and so they were testing the parachutes. And I totally agree. If I saw something like that, I'm riding along out there near Ruidoso, and I'm wandering out in the desert, and I see this funny-looking dish out there, I might want to poke around at it. But quite frankly, this is probably what it was.
You keep saying, using the word probably, and you say case closed. Those 2 don't jive.
Yeah,
How do
you're
you
right.
reconcile that?
Okay, let me say, from the Air Force perspective, that's exactly what it was.
Sir, does the Air Force...
And I don't mean to be rude about that. I want you to understand we are very, very proud of this report. We think in our office that this answers lots of questions, and it answers them logically and with integrity. And one other thing I might add is if you want to do your own research, in the back is a complete technical report bibliography, and also there is a terrific set of endnotes. And I recommend that if you're interested in this, that you take these and you do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Yes, sir.
Does the Air Force have any evidence at all of any sort of spacecraft wreckage or extraterrestrial presence on them?
Yes, sir.
And what is, can you tell us anything about this myth of Area 51, which has become part of everything from Hollywood movies to a local legend? What is Area 51? Is there such a place, and what does it do?
That actually should be outside this brief. Let me ask you a question. If you are talking about Groom Lake, Nevada, is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about the scene everybody remembers from the movie Independence Day.
My daughter asked me the same question. There is a facility in Groom Lake, Nevada. Quite frankly, I have no knowledge or expertise in the matters. I understand there are classified things that go on there, and that's all I have to say about it.
Well, let me just have one follow-up. How do you know, I mean, your name is now, Colonel John Haynes is going to go down in UFO lore as one of the people who took part, in the minds of some people, in the continuing cover-up by the government. How do you know that you're not being used? How do you know that you know the full story when you stand up and tell us that there's no evidence of this?
Because our job is to review all the Air Force documents for this era. And that's how we came up with this exciting and interesting and intriguing, quite frankly, report. I know you think that sounds like a broken record, but you need to get in here and read it, and you will see that many of the things that people think they saw correlate perfectly with Air Force research projects.
You're confident that you're not part of any cover-up, wittingly or unwittingly?
I'm totally confident, but I think Colonel Weaver, you might have seen him on TV earlier, said it best. We can't even keep single secrets. How could we have a conspiracy or a cover-up?
Yes, sir. A question, a follow-up to the Groom Lake operating location. Recently, there were a lot of sightings out in Arizona of supposed UFOs. Is it possible, within the range of possibility, that any classified aircraft from the Groom Lake area were in that vicinity, and this might explain why people are suddenly seeing a lot of strange landing lights and so forth?
Well, let me say two things. Number one, as far as Groom Lake, I don't have any knowledge of that area. Forgive me. It's just not within my area of expertise. I don't have the access. End of quote. Secondly, if you're interested in the Arizona question, I suggest that you contact the local authorities in Arizona and see what they have to say, because the Air Force no longer does any investigation of UFOs. Yes, sir.
Let's go back to that so-called Area 51, because in people's minds, when you say I can't talk about it because it's classified, conjures up, oh, there it is. There's the cover-up. Can you give us any hint, without violating any sense of confidential nature, what kinds of things might be happening?
Sir, I cannot. Forgive me. I just do not know.
Is there anyone in the Air Force that can?
I'm going to have to defer that to public affairs. It's outside of my area of expertise. Forgive me, but it's just outside of my area of expertise.
Rule out that Area 51 is only human-made equipment and intelligence.
Is that, do we call that leading the witness? Is that what we're, I'm sorry, I just don't know. Forgive me. It's just not an area that I have knowledge. Yes, ma'am.
Colonel, let me just go back one more time. That you say this is case closed and people should now believe it, but with the major hole, though, you're saying that they're wrong about the date, and the date being 6 years' time that they're wrong about. How can you, what explanation can you give them other than just saying, well, we just think they're just mistaken by 6 years?
Ma'am, I have no other explanation. I'm sorry. I have no other explanation. I'm looking at the facts as we have studied them, and I have no other explanation for that but what I've already given.
But how would that make it case closed?
Because we've reviewed all the relevant information, and we have finished this, and we're not going to revisit it. And in fact, it's all unclassified. You have an opportunity on your own behalf. I recommend you get the report, start digging in, get on the web, see what you can find out. Yes, sir.
Why did the Pentagon then think that it was necessary to respond now to this? Why did you have to come up with this report?
Well, we actually came up with the report because this is intriguing and fascinating research. You may have noticed this is also the 50th anniversary of the United States Air Force. You may have also concluded that we have been talking about other things about space and things of that nature, and this high-altitude balloon research is quite fascinating. But it was left in the dust. It's something we uncovered, and it's just kind of left in the dust of the space program. It wasn't romantic. Now you have men going up on the end of rockets, and here are guys jumping out of balloons. Kittinger, I believe, broke the speed of sound jumping out of that balloon. Can you imagine that? I mean, I can't imagine it. Yes, sir.
Is it possible that the Air Force could have missed something in its investigation? In other words, is it possible that there are unidentified flying objects, that there are extraterrestrial visits, and the Air Force simply has not found it or been able to detect it?
We have researched the Air Force projects and the Air Force information for these year groups. We have nothing else to say about them. You know, we don't believe there's anything else. I have no way of even vaguely believing there's anything else. I promised the gentleman right back here a question, sir, yes, sir.
Well, about 50 years ago today, a Air Force pilot spied a big array of saucers supposedly flying over Washington State. That may have started all this. Does the Air Force think it will never again investigate these reports? Is Project Blue Book was the end, and that's it?
You know, I don't ever want to speak for the Air Force about never again, but it's my opinion that they will not. Yes, sir.
Sir, from just a cursory examination of the report, it would appear that the Air Force compiled this information at the request of the GAO, at the request of a New Mexico congressperson, if I'm correct.
Now, that was report one, sir.
But even given then, even at that time, why then didn't the Air Force provide these very readily explanations for UFO activity when these questions first started being surfaced?
Well, this information was uncovered as we were preparing to publish that first book. We were actually looking for pictures. We had looked at all the information that surrounded 1947 and found absolutely nothing. But as we got into the out years, we realized that the Air Force had some other quite intriguing, I'll say it one more time, experiments that were going on that could be misconstrued. And that's why that was one of the reasons it was decided to publish the book. Yes, sir.
Did Captain McMaster or any of the other analysts come across any evidence that apart from the silver paper discs that went up with the high altitude balloons, that the Air Force conducted during this rather wide time frame, any other aerodynamic experiments involving manned or unmanned craft that looked like flying saucers? Well, you saw the payloads in the book. We saw them in the film. And I think those could easily be confused for that, too. And it is Captain McAndrew. So you'll get the... Yes, sir. But sorry, just apart from those, yes, sir, going up on the balloon, were there any other Air Force experiments that you know of involving craft that looked like flying saucers? No, sir. Whatever the experiment. Well, there were some other balloons, and there's some balloon shapes in here you might want to look at, too, that are very intriguing. In fact, they look a lot like some other people's pictures. Yes, sir.
We have time for one more question, and that's it.
I think she's going to deal with that question when I finish. One more question.
Do you believe in UFOs?
Personally, no, sir.
Why not?
Ma'am, I have no reason to believe that they're real.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry?
You're talking test facilities other than continental United States?
Yes.
In terms of research test facilities?
Yes, research test facility.
We'll have to get back to you on that.
This morning on C-SPAN, see live coverage of today's House Republican conference meeting. Each Wednesday, House Republicans meet behind closed doors to discuss the issues facing Congress and the GOP. But today they're opening their doors as they discuss tax policy. Live coverage begins at 9 a.m. Eastern here on C-SPAN. This week on America and the Courts, a speech by Chief Justice William Rehnquist recapping the Supreme Court's term.